Does everyone have the one AC? Minneapolis, are you guys both good? Is anyone not ready? The story of the U.S. criminal justice system is a story of debt relations, the economic logic and form of empire that allows the U.S. to transform its position as the world's greatest debtor in a one of colonial conquest and anti-black violence. WMC 18. The modern day criminal justice constitutes the intersection between legal system relations, debt and criminalization of a country-based central role in the configuration of black lives and labor, tens of thousands indigenous former slave, forced labor camps, class relations, debt, race, and essential features rather than recounting the legislative history about the scholarship, the origin, disciplinary neoliberalism, used as conceptual factors to treat the reform with the transformation of global capitalism, technical levels of wage to adhere to market logic and figure relation of production, social reproduction, asserting the structure power capital and enforcing market discipline, the raising class capitalism, you'll concept with the U.S. social system, the U.S. criminal justice apparatus, the black criminal justice country capitalism, deposit no other social issue elucidates the intersection more than current economic debt and imprisonment, and only an analytic structure on debt can effectively challenge the system. When was 18, the relation between debt and imprisonment in the U.S. is rooted in historical destabilization of welfare and expanded expansion of the penal state, mutual reinforcing velocity of debt and imprisonment continues to figure reality of everyday life and raise the community, legal forms, failure, systemic change needed by be recognized structural imperative that the debt criminal justice complex the U.S. symptomatic and deeply repressive social system can be challenged with no return, and constant ongoing rebellion and insurgency remains prior when emerges the identity, individual, and institution because they claim identity, individual, or institution, or to speak with tools that jeopardize. That's a general antagonism that is social with the police attempt to separate insurgency is prior to the metaphysical foundation of the police, the frame of physicization, for critique and policy on the level of individuation. The police fail to see this individual. The criminal justice system should recognize personhood. The spectrum of physicality through individuation with the state, police are just policy by another name. The question becomes, how do you want something other than that? In 20, there's a constant ongoing rebellion against identity, which primary thing rebels from itself. Is to think what he wants to see like he that's something like the individual regulation or institutions steps in try to come church and take it from the genuine tax and starts to see the primary rebellion his first freedom rebel against the police prompters the primary tax when he shows up when he is someone who is the individual and how to help to reframe to receive a frame of visualization what the visual different Denise calls there's genuine action of every person but taking one another protecting or you can just get from the document the individual has offended the right of the police that the critique right when they're being the individual can make the individual as a copy of the only produces that because you are encountering genuine uncertainty, the police that are separate from the weather from a population more separate from social one back in the United States. Once they feel the police act to make this they separate that uncertainty from black people. That's what means so put it away from visuality, then use the same numbers and personhood and individuality of them. Sometimes I love them or can't be it's not to move the state, help protection of individuality again and again. And they come back hard and they come brutality enough to invent them. They come back, they come back totally mobilized. We're not going to say we're going to find police. We're going to the police got a policy, got hospitals from back in the police there, but there was a police prosecuted by the numbers, but it is not looking at one of us saying kill stall them often never discretion insurgency is even against untouchable before the meta foundation of the terms of order that established in their policy police question because we're depositing one thing other than that because first she black social life is a human being a lesson how to one thing other than that and only the apps users that bad debt is an analytic can generate society necessary to confront the system. I mean Hardy 10 it's not correct to think about it the back from your head the back to the credit coming to create means privatization can be as means socialization longer than president but not get the country the government the university that can only be created and only expanded means the debt that is placed about that if you do the research to gather information on try to calculate or save it to get making concentration store it's documents in the break is a request for credit bill and someone saves the best just being gone given a debt you're in debt but you can't give credit but someone who has a bad habit she studies the student does not pay and thus we affirm militant preservation through planned failure as an enactment of substantial criminal justice reform and policing and sentencing by decriminalizing the neoliberal debt relation. How do we live and plan for a day that will never come? The one he sees a method of planned failure, poetics that aligns with page and pavement. The world is broken, easy to feel utterly lost in self-hatred and nihilism rather than endorse or transcendence of criminal justice reform that appeases policymakers. Our method of autonomous insurgency against a world structured by anti-black racism, colonialism, and manufacturing consent that conjures logistics and a loophole between hope and resignation. Hunt 1220. Benford does not seek the defense of the break some of the system to clear plan for judiciary regarding the condition unrelated to democratic partnership being completely happy to reinvention by practice by black and insurgency from Argentina black life and policy makers fix to me fix the policy making plans to matter of policy a desire for institutional collapse makes her counter to activism kind of figures motive being at a body has some frenzy after kind of agenda love for the world sense that the world is kind of come to an end for the world have a chance because the salience active space sourness opposition from optimism pessimism the way the whole cannot does not believe that the whole remains but ever since Trump plan for instead of prevalent country when you 16 anti-capitalist resistant thing activism is not denied data of organizing the study movement comes we are right now movement bills remain to attach that comes to our fantasy the whole approach the whole plan is not to feel better but to get better at feeling and the trading of black flesh marks the birth of modern logistics the first global movement a commodity required algorithmic regulation and arrangement of bodies and movements secure financialization that can witness today in criminal justice policy. Logistics has never been merely about the movement of goods, but control of the flow of movement and touch itself. The nation state serves as an external actor to check capitalism's access, whereas an arrangement and governmentality ensure the enclosure of the form of radical touch that would threaten logistics. The world is inseparable from logistics. The code of modernity that moves to show path demands. The era comes in killing of black and brown bodies. Harney 18. Body logistics come about military logistics, becoming a referring to huge profits of logistics and permanent war in the industry, but the modern logistics, new kind of war, humans we stand up for have been the trade until first global movement, mass commodity finance, Logistics trying to global shipping in the exchange of stories along essential modern logistics about the manufacturers top regard tradition abundantly bodily and social action the absence of imposed on the African stand upon the African company JJ people from plantation logistics back control the flows in terms of limiting their physical quantities and finance limited to carbon price levels and consideration of finance and they were on the line the entire supply coming off the line requires to make our indeterminacy contingency logistics white science and the science of being white and the way we discuss the resolution matters. Logistics has infiltrated every level of social production and seek to make debate runs in the nodes in the production line of policy making and research. As you ubiquitous system is, where a model system glitch, new refining is never supposed to happen. Beller 17. Operations to industrial produce and reproduce the pentagon for generation official upstate computations study party accumulation strategy operating data consistent and thought and the quantifiable computer program. However, perhaps not the mental definition of the ways operating conflict domination person limit the cohesive but the micro struggle of organization level of struggle organization though existing political operations around because current concepts for circumscribed by a fully functionless by the mixture of information finding strategies in everyday life and force to through perfect information or advantage fighting and accumulation of politics and policy based on the side of the state and the state capital and the logistics is infiltrated debate. It means uniqueness flips our way for predictable model of debate. It refused to universalize stasis. Calci 19. Within the court is state debates and constitutes sovereignty of some importance of word which has a piece of which mentality becoming granted is not able to directly think radicals a piece of percent of ground is war against its own view and intellectually debates and politics and break on the horizon and prefer a vision over the self-improvement of logistics. Moten Harney 15. When the content cannot demonstrate actually consequences policy comes in diagnosis boxing policy there's something with the people that the other way around the people not speaking embrace general actions he did next self-defense but he positive participation of imposition policy and final position on the wrong we include another frame complete study or revision comes to get revision from central version of one another by capitalism improvement funding on breakfast and formative percent no end connection the concept hands to life can open broad life can of career life can open panic can be sorting complete can form sort of form this state emerging reasons the value of the traction that we function combined can be individuated and against a pragmatic urging a democratic despotism voting affirmative situation study within a blockage of a rise as a means of unraveling the prominence of political sovereignty element 16 about opportunity data what to do to fix that in policy name form a political control and campaign deputized from command social reproduction identity credit being improvement how do you contemplate planning the policy with military preservation fusion policy how do you also social place state there's nothing wrong with this logistic containers object fixed information logistic how do you kind of topic how do you live for their imagination in terms of non-place evolution to be thinking on university and happy the marines castaways and future APs not being taken they need just to be teachers type of the form and appearance of social being and collective like a contest intuitively and I'm also trying to have a social being others reminding of their radical change requires structure and instability is inevitable. The AF is key to dwelling within its cracks and fissures to mobilize resistance, but their dual power is whitewash, insufficient, and parasitic on the legacy of the Black radical tradition. Cosway 18. 14. The radical Black organizing action could find and BLM extension to get relief in their face and the Black at their human coalition against the people that somebody falls over circle of and save Africans to disorganize and to sustain and each other for the community division for the whole day but over here so there is anything here and after society and communal living the president of the hope and future co-option injection and the plan to develop its auditing like by hierarchy democratic determined agenda thinking with already existing original national auditing economy networks and ready doing about the theory and practice elaborating and stronger cooperation injection which for the future cooperative initiative cooperation injection recognize dual power building solidarity but power outside the state but also searching future engagement on the ways can use so individual power we see and suddenly and side of contradicting and compromising women which we flows of future potential that technology discloses reveal contradiction me explaining the last piece of Koizoi evidence is marked exploited. The fugitive potentials that technologies disclose reveal contradictions to be exploited.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You've gone for framework every time you've debated a KF this year. Why should we trust you to be in a debt
one? That's not true. We have not.
Okay, you went for TAP once. Again, why are you part of the undercommons and why should we trust you to be in a debt relationality with us?
Also not true. I went for the pessimism K. Last round I went for the James K against a critical affirmative. So.
Okay, you've gone for one twice. This doesn't answer the question. You go for framework majority of the time you debate KFs. Why is this in good faith and why are you touching us to touch each other?
Well,
I have no idea what that last part of that question meant.
Serialization of the undercommons.
Touching us to touch each other is not anything that we've forwarded. But broadly, we think that we have a good method and we think you should answer whether or not that method is a good idea or not. So
that's fair enough. The Kelsey evidence says that stasis is sovereignty. I guess what is sovereignty and then why is it bad?
Well, the Kelsey evidence is a critique of stasis points. So the idea that some predictability can be based only in like one understanding of the resolution disavows out in debate, predictably is truly generated. In the Kelsey evidence specific to just the way it refers to war, not in the sense of military war, it says blackness itself.
That's fine, but the impact
and that desire to
bad. The impact to why stasis is bad is sovereignty. So I'm wondering what sovereignty is and why it's bad.
Well, the Kelsey evidence makes the argument that desire to regain, to translate from an unknown unknowns to known knowns and make everything predictable under a stasis is
So
bad.
we should not try to produce known knowns.
Well, in the context of our argument, we've applied this to, for example, predictability, the idea that it's solely based on the resolution. We have critiqued the idea that you could only draw it from one stasis point. Rather, you should look to
How
ways
does
that
the
the
affirmative
norms have been
consider
shaped.
absent its critique of the resolution? I understand that your critique of the resolution might be true. I'm not sure why your political strategy is thus desirable.
Well, we think military preservation is a good strategy to combat logistics. You've only asked questions about the resolution.
Okay, going back to that, then,
that answer is in the context of debate how we forwarded our response to
what
the
does
resolution.
militant preservation do to solve sovereignty, like, broadly?
Well, one, we haven't said we resolve sovereignty. Military preservation is a strategy to combat logistics. We think using an analytic of mutual indebtedness is a good way.
That card is
forward
less in line
planning.
with the method of the AF. It makes a uniqueness argument
Okay,
about how
what
you should
does-
evaluate
what
the AF in
violence
the
does
context
an
of
analytic
debate.
of indebtedness solve?
Because instead of forwarding policy, top-down instrumental solutions, and working for some sort of telos or end goal, we forward planning, which is working for each other, which combats logistics because logistics works from the top-down end goal solutions to fracture movements and solidarity, making it feel like we're always working for
Okay, so
ourselves.
how do we
each
plan for each other? Like, how do we plan for each other? Like, how does that operate? How does that, explain to me how planning for each other resolves violence.
Sure, the Koizoi evidence actually has a good example of this. It cites Cooperation Jackson. They mobilized to work for, or they organized within to create strategies. They work towards electing political leaders. They were able to massively free people from prisons and organize politics for that. We have not said like we reject all institutional engagement. We still have material strategies that result from planning. We change the position you start from.
Claire, did you put nay on the chain?
No, but I can.
Yeah, can you put them on then?
Thank you.
Yep. Truth on the case.
It's sent. It's sent. Does everyone have it?
Just give me 1 sec, sorry.
Yep, you're fine.
We'll put other people on the chain after that.
Does everyone have the doc now? If no one verbally objects, I'm going to assume I'm good to start whenever. Wait. Okay. What the heck? My computer. If no one verbally objects, I'm going to assume I'm good to start whenever. Intertopical affirmatives must result in substantial criminal justice reform in one of the 3 topic areas in the U.S. criminal justice refers to police courts and correctional institutions as distinct from criminal law. Bernardi, criminal justice setting police courts are distinct from the criminal law, which defines the behaviors of punishable under law. Sentencing occurs after the determination of liability. Collins, 18. The U.S. Supreme Court has we've said sentencing trial after the trial of the defendants of submitted to the position of punishment black officer trial is for racial judicial determination. Claimant of a sentencing of the form of punishment after the defendant guilty. Policing is the step that brings people into the justice system. It's done by policing and precedes prosecution. I said that Chittier 18 to policing is criminal policy bills make it the first determination, but there's someone like this is police to prosecution. The impact is tactics debate is not about finding perfect solutions, about learning from the failures of our imperfect ones. The belief that any one debate can translate to material outcomes is naive at best and complicit in the system. They critique at worst. Topical advocacy encourages the ethos of humility and interconnectedness which can engender ontological shifts in society and confront the crisis of modernity that requires a willingness to be wrong. There are 2 internal links. 1, limits of bounded topic serves as a predictable stasis point wherever the debate that guarantees the thematic coherence. Absent defined limits debate to competitive incentives create a race to the margin that destroy topic research. 2, ground a predefined controversy ensures a vibrant living and in-depth classes, but it's reasonable. It's unreasonable to prepare for alternative frameworks without a ground allocated by the parameters of the resolution. All the 2AC defenses claim overall and concession or governations and stable base superior of debates. 3, affects T. The 1AC advocates for an alliance formula, which is the outside means of the object of the resolution. That turns the the net can't research alone predict every abstract that could eventually lead to a limited alliance when this class becomes impossible. There's no benefit to testing strategies if they're right, they don't influence their subjectivities. That supercharges the impact. It means we can vote negative presumption for extra T. The nature of the topic mechanism controls all research impacts are anti-predictable because they expand the controversy beyond the question of criminal justice and debates over liberation methods that skews class and negatives because they undermine the strategy presumption. The debates are centered around whether alliance whether criminal justice should be limited. That's an independent reason to vote negative. Sacrifice the rest and extreme math bias which makes it F impossible. Any solvency claim that may be beyond the rest is a reason to vote negative. To vote F since it proves our impacts. The K, there's no new world or body. Texas transcendental hapticality because the politics of reaction and performance and practice localizing politics through investment in individual renegotiation history and their hyper focus on critique. The only hope is to upend techno-capitalism. Mr. Objective one he sees call for a failure in favor of reason the reins of enlightenment paradigm like democratic centralism to fight in this world. A strong vein of the 63. Okay. The third word is an opposition. Opposite Europe is a massive and the human. The third world needs to be history. The health of the word is no action because they all listen to the Spain and the bananas for the because those who may be constantly Europe is the research with the basic currency history with the refusal of modern values of the European value linked to the consumer reaction or politics from the solution that we have to the word. A lot of people didn't come to the advantage of historical revolution workers and live in taking historical ownership and the views of the freedom and other competitive opportunities of protection as well as love and battle universal dialectical relation between the federation of the first second superstructure debate of cultural principles of access to vigilance revolutionary imperialism democratic socialism the concept of party and value military experience with the intrinsic like the address of the practical quality of minority but established ability to the particular the country don't want to work with the direction of forcing ability to spread the imperialism and overtakes with the international with the rules but not the revolution to the dead end the affirmative is riddled with leftist melancholy and debates massive network of scholars activists policymakers all of whom should or who can and should orient their energies toward the production of a better world. They a presumption that we should not challenge churches on the level of scope and scale with the resources debate offers us as an explicit concession to fascism vote negative presumption regardless of the benefits of their method frame fragmented politics are fundamentally non-unique and non-inherent. Hester 17 or an episode of fragmentation is seclusion but all the different nationalism but delicious historical and also capitalism but differences go between the opposite strategies between opposite generative and power and capitalism power the reality that have theories and list over legal frame and personal forms that are available potentially for some we can take it up to suitable use for political constitution the hegemonic liberal capitalism they use that kind of obstruction and anxiety hanging of the progressive politics of disability the demand of aversion and future oriented but republics of the civil acceleration of possible intellectual and first capitalism creating a new ideal to get over social media that can be used for the enactment of revisionary process. The only question of this debate is whether the affirmative offers a strategy to challenge capitalism, the political and cultivated black settlerism is locked into place through the alienation of black and native labor and obstructions to a form of capital. They're optimistically into the face of the Eurocene and doors the contingency of capital risk tomorrow. 18 the black women Missouri submitted within a much for capitalism and over recent not logical scandal over the reboot with the alien black women the company the rigorous reason about the animation predictable and reification of black film the currency to the justice we must think about black money sent to it with the amount of financial systems genesis of the black settler inform the black love speculative for individual strategy of being black is always about to come to the condition of capital accumulation dominating on single labor and exchange their transaction insurance against the running soda rid of the speculative years of capital like not until GPA by capitalism and symptom of electrical side. Social quantification of the capital departs from the body of the no longer use national stuff to do the name of labor financial characters because the company is the capital of the informity stage they never know the specific of the specific not very recently body can be extracted from the quantifiable forms of data previous the switching to find a social video contributor capitalism institution capitalism is in terminal crisis voting after his wage a single micro political issue determines the leftist organizing necessary to defeat resurgent fascism Robinson 19 to stop fascism labors by the capital super facing an organization interaction the structural dimension of overcumulation but looking at the mental have a hedge about over the historical character that a capitalism but crisis is essentially different to something the gap resulted in sharp polarization between the intro to left and popular first and intro to and the other side of further durably fashion as they said at the right world against the capital state to continue house promoting mogul social political forces and holds together coming first capitalism strive to accumulate compels environmental catastrophe nuclear war for we should mobilize our intellectual energy supporting legal 10 11 that are humans around the world part of the military environmental like the differences regard the capitalist escalate dark capitalist based academic capital simulation but key like capital ecological deficit give the drive to accumulate rational centralized rationality this is not historical ecological history for environmental capitalism with the agenda of us vote negative to embrace the academic position of comrade against capitalist planetary destruction that requires a politics of solidarity and master of the affirmative theorizing Kluge Dean interviewed by Alvarez 19 comrades of the action of political circle his world historical circle against political history of the first of the freedom of separation drive the neutrality sometimes how are you going to do about the part of the comrade of the also organization over the life of the better notice to government legislators the primary organization the worst of the individual and the collectivity that appeals to be added in the collectivity that none of the freedom of politics and regulatory circumstances I would just the capitalism we also live for the commerce of the political circle between the world the which one of the already said of in Chicago school kind of the research today but the commerce circle the struggle the commerce business part of so under those on of each other creative expectation for action that are rather come to come with political purpose to becoming to have a new revolution of business of the commerce political agency is psychoanalytically structured by drive orienting or political reasons away from communists to make failure satisfying for closes the political tough deed 12 element of already the identification of some average voters are can never be resisted the commitment for once with failing efforts to satisfy the early with the circle around the business very very district we talk politically reactive the passivity structure the left is lost hostility, set of communities, but that are more profitable. We have the internet of figurative communities, political changes, whereas the collective center because of these actions. No, it's the case. Archival acquisition did the 1AC's research project becomes the next catalog artifact within the academic. They critique the scholarship protocols and historian graph that the academy creates an exciting intrinsic value of the comments in the conduct would reduce the 1AC to a piece another to acquire while creating the perfect condition for U.S. saviors and the cost of surveillance and imperialism domestically and abroad. Ferguson 12 the archives and institutions information the archives of facial deputies trial the shows speaking of home for their documents to be under certain jurisdictions or whatever to pursue documents of says the secret may have manipulated the archives or represent the police to put the documents of regime is believe system will take these propositive put in the rightful place and this the name of the American speakers but the social difference of the nation the nations which result in products and to the promoter a couple of functions to be considered representation of the conflict of the new political power relation with the minority of the period which the power our culture was many imperialism which attacked the apparatus and dispense the independence form is followed by unity development the chapter of colonialism was recommended for the year companies former colonies south of freedom state to generous segregation neo-colonialism magnified of Congress magnified regulation to give the hour of colonial independence freedom that about would be the international character from the ability center to insert parties to carry the hegemonic authority, the perfect resort of the investment in the reformation strategies around the decision. No perm, their attempt to corporate transcendence is a performance in the space is tied to transforming a blackness into it. Do you want me to skip to? Yep. There is no distinction between policy and planning, but their artificial divide turns case Shulman 20 no the reason for the justified purpose of the political but the purpose of abolition of radical democracy whereas motive social everybody held what is it and the comes of the economy individuals of the commonality regenerated remedies of the practice of politics the rules are responsible for creating a pattern common every week in the most frontline community engaged in the fire policy little subdivision as the real policy lived in the state of views of political contributors things which are further associated with areas of the circular which the resisting fugitive democracy and no element of localism necessary to seek to use the power of the structure, inequality, collective freedom, organized schools of fatal, diversity, the right to vote, exercise the popular sovereignty, liberty, freedom, democratic party, and the national political backgrounds, and the attack of government planning, and I feel like we should be what if we follow. Okay, that card is cut at what if we follow. Okay.
Are you good?
1 second. I'm gonna get better.
Wait, Nanya, before you go, I just have one question.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. Your T interpretation, to be clear, does not require defending USFG.
Nope.
Right, perfect.
Okay, or no, is that it? First on, I don't know why I paused that. On T first, what tactics do you get from your model of debate?
Well, we've broadly made a claim that the only way we can engage in tactics in the first place is in a model of debate where the political.
And what tactics do you gain from that?
I mean, tactics that where we can engage one in the government and two can engage in
Just
material
tactics.
policy.
What are those tactics?
Yeah.
Tactics for liberation. There's not a single tactic. And that is why it would be good for the act to have tied their strategy to a material tactic and then tied that material tactic to changing criminal justice reform.
Okay, sure. Does releasing people from prisons meet this interpretation?
When the affirmative defense relationality between ourselves.
Does a strategy to release people from prisons meet the interpretation?
It has to it would have to result in releasing people from prisons.
Okay.
It can't, not an end point, like a goal, like something you have a material plan to get to.
You have to have a plan to get to that. That is your interpretation. It's not just like it has to have.
You have to be able to get people out of prison. You cannot have an end point or an end goal.
Prisons are not topical. Regardless, they're not part of the topic areas. You'd have to read evidence.
Prisons are not part of the topic area.
Sentencing.
We read a card that defines what sentencing is.
Okay, sure. We find a plan. We know it's bad. I guess what skills do you have to organize after? Your argument is that you need tactics. Debate is about learning from failures or imperfect ones. I guess knowing something is bad. What tactics do you have to organize after getting to there?
Well, the argument there is that we can improve our tactics. When we figure out that this.
You improve the tactics. I guess how do you get to organizing from there? Or a method to create change. You have found some solution or some strategy. You have said it, or not strategy. You found a solution. You said it is bad. I guess what does that teach you about how to organize or how to get to an end goal?
Well, it's a way to organize to get to that solution.
Okay, so we just need to defend a way to organize to get to a solution.
No, but the solution has to work. We get to indict the solution. We get to
Okay, so if we win that we have a solution that you have not indicted, decriminalize a neoliberal debt relation, do we meet?
Yeah, but the act does not result in.
We can move on.
You have an end point and a goal.
The CAPK, I guess, what is embracing the position of the comrade do for environmental catastrophe?
We think that communism is good. And we think that since we are in the academy right now, we should be communists. And we think the way to be communist is to study and plan a world that ought to
And that
lead-
solves environmental catastrophe
Yes,
because
because it is not, this is liberal individualism, the belief that it can't work because you're just one person. We're not one person. We're linking up with comrades across the world. We're studying.
okay. I have one more question actually. The Dean evidence last night says invigorating communism of political engineering requires amplifying the collective desire that can cut through these affective networks. I guess how do you get to that?
Like that's good.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sending it out. Okay. The doc should be sent now. I'm really sorry, but I really have to use the restroom. I sent the doc, but I'll leave my camera on and everything. I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
Uh,
How you doing, Ananda?
Good.
I always try to get people to talk. It's so boring, online debate. There's not a social part. Have to.
case, topicality, and then the critique. I think it's a safe assumption that everyone has the doc. Okay.
Give me a sec to bring it up.
Yep. Okay.
Trying to-
Is anyone not ready? Right. The U.S. now criminal justice complex operates via the violence grouping violence, the gifted liberal democratic freedom that must be repaid through access to resource land, people, and blood to maintain neoliberalism. The sociopathic demand for access, no logistics is the necessary condition for any conceptual U.S. empire and power. The process of extraction is maintained through the necropolitical destruction of resource others to maintain the efficiency on the production line. Vote have to embrace military preservation through planned failure as a means towards working towards the vision of the decriminalization of the neoliberal debt relation, not as a one-off event, but a continuous process of coalescing social energy to resist and rewire the trajectory of criminal justice. And indicate this aligns with the illicit moments of dissembly that interrupt the rhythm of production through moving all the wrong ways, except by cooperation, Jackson altered network that cannot be captured by the protocols of productivity and freed mass amounts of prisoners from the structures of debt relations to maintain state power. This is in line with different movements such as buyers clubs who use not just prices to sabotage the profits of farmers, school owners, and Coppell logistics strikes to disrupt the permanent organization of corporate power in the face of logistics as a driving force to shape that shapes your practices. You shift the terms debate to crafting strategy for sociology, planning supposed to prescribe for instrumental solutions, a policy of practice of mutual indebtedness against sense logistics attempt to containerize and ship a motive being together that creates motives care for the sake of care. One Ferguson argument. This argument is asinine. They created a double standard. No one would ever vote neg on presumption or because we didn't do anything because a neg ballot doesn't pass the plan. And the presentation of scholarship isn't enough. It shouldn't be. It should be about the AFS method. But if it comes down to this, you can vote AF to reject their investments in logistics in this debate if we win a link argument to any of their off-case positions. Too, yes, the AF is a departure from the status quo in a good method. Both research and military preservation are material proven by the examples above. And our Beller evidence describes a process wherein it is impossible to separate the two. Scholarship is inherently material because it allows us to understand how we relate to the structures outside of it, and their artificial divide moves away from the interconnectedness necessary to build an indebtedness. 3, no link to university arguments presumes a divide between the in here and out there. That argument is it's all connected, which is explained above. This is linked turned by arguments about being in but not of the university, refusing its call to order, but creating fugitive moments within it. Their refusal of the university altogether, which is the only way they cannot know. They can no link this, if it applies, or else it applies to the cap clay. Only leads to alt-right fill-in that disavows the way black and brown scholars weaponize the university and the status quo. 1 and C2 Schulman evidence wrong. Every expansion of logistical powers reciprocating upsurgence logisticality. It's our uniqueness argument. Transfer systems are disrupted by laborers. Packing systems are funded by saboteurs, and ships are frequently hijacked by key pirates and key docking zones, etc. In the context of the criminal justice forum, we explained it. In the context of cooperation, Jackson, etc. Logistical instability is inevitable. Or RF is a question of dwelling within such cracks and fissures as means of refusing logistical tropes. 1, we meet the 1EC has affirmed the resolution to defend a substantial justice form in the area of policing, which was not sentencing, which means they've recounted or find the wrong word. Additionally, it does not really matter that much in the context of how we've explained the AF. You can hold us to the advocacy text of the 1EC and say that we can't solve for things outside of it. And our argument was never just that the 1EC affirms those movements outside of it, merely that it is in line with those movements in the past, which demonstrates this violation is nonsense. 2, form is content 1EC Beller says the common linguistic has been suffocated in algorithm mode of governance, which necessitates the harvest of life. The ballot can serve as so that reprograms everyday consciousness towards sociality. You should invest. It's a question of where you invest your political energy towards. 3, counter model debate should shift to a position of planning instead of policy in response to the criminal justice system. AFs should defend a method to reform the CJS in one or more of the 3 topic areas. As a starting point, you should prefer revision over improvement, i.e. the centering study instead of violent correction. Only reframing debate around questions away from notes and neoliberal self-improvement maximization creates generative and ethical strategies. That's the second last piece of moat and hardy evidence. 4, 1EC Kelsey says predictability is not neutral but ideological. Uniqueness of our way predictable model debate refuse their universalized stasis. People don't just prep based on the text of the resolution, but understand how 2 decades of critical affirmatives have shaped what we understand as predictable in the status quo, which is what we base our preparation off of. 5, ethics T and extra T both literally said alliance commitments in their violation in the 1 and C. The new explanation justifies new answers and demonstrates how they lead to a homogenization of scholarship. 2, base a point and lit-based checks any of their abuse claims. Affirmatives must have a method that specifies the reduction of CJR in more of the 3 topic areas as a starting point. It cannot be anything, and any app that reads a method out of thin air would lead to a lose to presumption. The C subpoint is it guarantees all ground, regardless of the method. Every DA, counterplan, case turn, K, etc. bred from research on the topic applies. D subpoint, if their T interpretation does not require the USFG, then is just as unpredictable as ours and is not based on any of the words in the resolution. If it is any actor, it is exactly the counter interpretation and demonstrates all apps linked to their offense at some level. All critical affirmatives, every method you take has some effect outside of an active criminal justice form. Otherwise, it's not real world and it cannot generate a good education about tactics that we should take. Now, DA is 6 is the individuation data focused on telos means we can never organize. We only organize ever for political goals, which includes an understanding of relationality. Means our motto is a prerequisite to any of their technical literacy offense. Their skills, a prior de-animation of personal relationships in favor of institutional analysis, which ensures those spawn advocates who people as blips on a graph, which is very distancing. We criticize 7 logistics, DA drive to access. Their calls for iteration of the perfection of ground for tactics to make us the most efficient in our analysis is logistical. Our counter-interpretation allows debates on the topic, but refuses to drive to perfect limits around the impact of logistical governance and outside of it. The drive to identify and root blockages, the name of improvement, marks black and brown care as lacking value or purpose, and it destroys a sense of community. Tactics, imperfection, arguments presume universality. Their starting point of debate is a neutral space is what he criticized that relies on liberalist notions that we can convince everyone, which is the failures of the left. We should be diametrically opposed to some things which only our counter-interpretation allows for. That's the Kelsey evidence critique. 1 case outweighs logistics, collaborative factors, socialist organizing ensures your purity. Politics reformulates whiteness, continues wage war against black and brown communities. Capitalism can't explain how bodies are recorded by race and overkill operates or how intimate violence happens because there can never be a rational explanation for that exploitation of violence. That turns to the alternative solvency. 2 major markers or organizations proves the ISO and Socialist Worker Party have both dissolved in the last few years because of exposure on how leadership handled violence. 2, the 1 season update to the logistics is the newest wave of capitalism that container privatizes affect, the sociopathic demand for access that is imposed on everyone that individuates people and makes it feel like we're only fighting for ourselves. and it takes away very being's relationality, so not just at the levels of means of production, but the means of social reproduction. 3, permutation about that's the one you see causal evidence that demonstrates, and I'll read the rest of it here. One is considering the 18 everything capitalism seems to require separate ways of between the sufficient to refuse capital from capitalism and touching up the what marks out and marks didn't discover collectivism, the exclusion of the hard marks of reading to be disposal on that spectrum of the slave, the vertical accumulation of slavery for years before the first capitalist. Now the links arguments 3, 1 1 and C1. The concept desire to fix and correct is in and of itself a neoliberal project that ensures it cannot maintain a commitment to organizing that is sustained. It's also just false. Black and brown organizers share experience that can be analogized and inherently draw them together. For 1 and C2, but logistical sovereignty bad is our argument, not all sovereignty bad. The Black and Native people producing their own institutions and sociality is in line with dual power and military preservation, as explained above in the causal evidence. So 5, 1 and C3, Hester is linked to individualism is the opposite of the one you see in the is described the status quo logistics and individuates us, but only mutual indebtedness per the one you see can bring us to the other. 6, 1 and C4, Amara evidence is about reducing Black people to bodies through pessimism, obviously not us. 7, no impact extinction is now 2050 for Black and brown bodies. Police and militarized violence and occupation, gentrification, surveillance all prove that prioritizing logistics comes first. Pure capitalism collapse can never cooperate with how logistics is collapsing. Marginalized communities now, their extinction scenarios attack classic tactics of whiteness that imagines a future which distracts from the death of those people. Now, being indebted to one, there's a prerequisite to absolvency. Solvency creates an analytic to understand how we're entangled with things like warming, which it creates an incentive to ask. 9, no link to the Dean evidence. Her camaraderie is filled with internal contradictions, proliferates anti-Black pathologization, which serves as a DH, as well as coming in 20 dates use of history selective contradictory flows to explain the explicit hierarchy, separation between organized and unorganized, on different levels of camaraderie in the parties. So, again, said relational theory becoming against politics comes from below, giving rise to strikes, movements, parties. Organization is there to structure the organic relationships. Teach critique of allyship and identity politics, false thought. Assertions of particularity as motivating against political struggle. What if we were to see these foundations change into revolutionary politics? The working class, there's a sense of revolutionary politics and pathologization of diverse experiences of working class life. Universality, there's a president design sets up versus false universality, market universality. 10, logistics cause extinction. We just gagging in 7th shift. It has to be culture, not economic one. Until such a ruptures of human behavior, sociological charge of the environment, global warming, distribution of means world resources, means status quo, the territory of the institution of our present ethnic class or Western genre, the man is an actor, discipline, our present definition, what it means to be human that became down, and then equated with the Western genre, the locates mutation, and the new relationship with nature would lead to the rights of capitalism, and not prison from the mode of production. Capitalism controls as the process of function. They must be just only to the economic conception of the human. That card is marked at human.
You want to mark
Yeah. You marked Gagny at human, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gagny at human, and then Cummings at universality, and
actually, yeah, I want to mark a Cummings just see what works.
Yep, I got you.
Thanks.
All right. Hey, I just sent it. I can wait until Gabe gets it before we start cross-sex if you want.
Just tell me when you're ready.
Yeah. Once we get it, we're gonna take prep, so it's gonna not really matter. But I just not yet to get it. Just got it. I'm opening it right now.
You guys are-
No, I want to open it. Now we're good. Yep.
Okay, are you ready for crossing?
No, I want to take prep before process.
Okay, we're gonna take breath. I'm starting now. 9. Ready for context?
Yeah, I'm good.
There was a lot of arguments about why you're in line with a bunch of different movements. I would like to know what reading the 1AC or doing the ballot would do to like progress those movements, or like what strategy the app has to kind of do that.
Sure. I think we made two arguments here. One, the judge votes F if they think the 1EC's method is good. We don't have to win an argument for why the ballot necessarily leads to that. But two, we think debate is a unique space that allows for the presentation of scholarship. The artificial divide between the sort of in here and out there, the idea that, scholarship is completely disconnected from movements outside. We think the 1EC's presentation of scholarship introduced a discussion in this debate. You have introduced, for example, the capitalism critique, the very idea that you were flowing, you were listening to our arguments, you were having this discussion with us demonstrates that the idea that you can separate scholars and activists is ridiculous.
First point about method, I want to come back to that. What is the affirmatives method that results in either reducing policing or like changing sentencing or any of the stuff you list on TOCs?
Okay, sure. So in the context of the AF, we've said that we decriminalize the neoliberal debt relation. The way we get there is through coalescing social movements, where in the context of the question that all activists face is what do we direct our political energy towards? The 1EC has answered that question with we should work towards decriminalizing the neoliberal debt relation in the way that people get imprisoned for debt in the status quo for those conditions.
But I want to know how you get to decriminalization. Like you talk about energy.
Sure. Okay, sure. So in the context of that, well, one, the argument about where do we direct our political energy towards. The second argument is that our Moten and Harney evidence describes a process of planned failure where we understand that status quo conditions in worlds are impossible to meet the needs of those marginalized now. Only an understanding of creating new relations with each other through what our evidence describes as a frame of mutual indebtedness is capable of creating new institutions that are capable of challenging those things. Our Kozoi evidence gives an example of this working through that future potentiality, creating national and international solidarities that link up networks of people.
All right,
Yeah,
I want to move on. What makes something logistical? Like you call a bunch of things like logisticality. Like what makes something logistical?
Okay, so logisticality is distinct from logistics. Our argument is that logisticality is a good response to logistics, but logistics is defined by what Moten and Harney describes as the general degradation of means. By this, they mean the sociopathic demand for access, the constant demand for improvement that is imposed on marginalized subjects, which then rids them of their very ways of being, their relationality with other people, etc. Our argument is that constant demand is bad, and the only way to refuse it is through the app.
9, starting now.
I resent a doc with this Kozoi card because it's like split across the 1EC and the 2EC. It has the full thing in one if you want it.
One card is in the body form.
Is it just a K?
Wait, Gabe, you left
Nobody can hear.
audio,
Nobody can hear.
so no one can hear you.
Can everyone hear me? Is there a problem? Oh, there was a problem.
Okay, now we can hear you. We could not hear you earlier, so like whatever you said, we have no idea.
Start over.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. God, I was going off in that. We'll do it again. I think Coppell, you can hear me. Darcel, you can hear me. Okay, cool.
Wait, is there an order?
Yeah, that's
I
what
think
I'm
that's
asking.
that.
It's just the capitalism critique. There's like a 1 minute, 30 second to 2 minute long overview at the top.
Bet.
Okay.
Gosh, man, I gotta sound even better now. Okay, cool. Darcel, I have you pinned, so if you could give me like a thumbs up if you can hear me when I'm speaking, that'd be amazing. Cool. Capitalism's internal crisis, the drive for profit incentivizes military industrial buildup, research, destruction, which makes extinction inevitable. That outweighs the affirmative and causes disproportionate impacts on the global south through resource wars, heat waves, and ecological devastation. Extinction destroys any possibility for future liberation or value for all humans. Precludes affirmative solvency. Being consequentialist when comparing impacts is the only ethical flame that values all life equally, and anything else is a slope to genocide. While capitalism kills it, it's also install fascism. The forces of reaction from Proud Boys and Trump are building a base and cadre to seize power in response to capitalism's loss of hegemony, and they are winning. This force stalls magnitudes greater violence than any app often can solve. Giving up on revolutionary institution building is dangerously naive and means the liberal institutions they rely upon to cohere such as the academy cannot sustain a libertarian project against fascist planning. Lincoln Lunchar's case and his try for the alternative. They have conceded psychoanalysis. It is game over. If we win a single link, it means the affirmative is psychoanalytically trapped in the cycle of failure. Neoliberal capitalism produces precarity and dissatisfaction in our life and social position. This structure feels so complete that material resistance is rendered impossible. Instead, capitalism circular its spectacles of revolution and radicality, such as Netflix movies about the PPP and infographics about communist history, so that we get the just of action while being depoliticized. This means that saying revolution good is not offense absent material planning. Leftist academics who focus inward on studies and projects that don't direct themselves towards communist revolution know internally they still love the proletariat because they'll benefit continuously from academic rewards without pushing those back towards the hope of political change. And they displace this guilt with the same type of incessant micro-political activity, the exact thing that the affirmative calls planning over and over again. Dean explains this through the psychoanalytic phenomenon of the drive. The reason so many self-described radicals waste their time in hapless protests in academic life or in places like debate is because they enjoy failing them to enjoy the press of politics without structuring their enjoyment around the goal. 2 and C, 1, 2, and 3. They have conceded the Amaro evidence, which means their counter theory of logistics is wrong. Fungibility is true because economics of insurance is speculative risk, not because of death. The reason why Black and Indigenous people are turned into surplus populations is not a drive for knowledge nor debt, but rather because they are insured, and that fungibility through finance economies makes it much more likely that violence occurs. Intimate violence is not something the affirmative solves. Think about how we respond to intimate violence in the world of the app. Oh, we say it is bad. We feel each other in new ways. In the world of the alternative, we can create actual fucking accountability mechanisms that respond to intimate violence, such as things that allow for people to have control over their own reproductive labor, which turns the affirmative faster than they can turn the alternative. The sharecropping and the prison industrial complex use the financial logic of expropriation, which proves that there's not a meta-ethical frame that causes violence, but rather specific material structures that should be intervened in. The ISO and the World Socialist Organization are much closer to the affirmative than they are to the alternative. Both of these organizations gave up on mass movement building and instead moved to posting a lot of infographics online, which is much closer to the affirmative's consciousness building project than the alternative. The next argument about how we prioritize affect, the Amaro evidence alone answers this. It indicates that the intimate violence that Black women face, which is the theorization of affect from the Black radical tradition that they cite, comes because they are forced into places of reproductive labor because of the material structures of capitalism, which means prioritizing affect is a symptom focus that locks us in to leftist impetism. The permutation debate is going to be the 2AR. You should change the way you view the link debate given the wide-ranging nature of the 1AC. They have made claims to pretty much defend the last 50 years of the Black radical tradition. Their evidence defends Cooperation Jackson, a radical co-op, and George Schuyler, who is a literal Black conservative. They are right. The AF was always already the permutation, but the 1C was always already a pick. Every link is an argument why the over-inclusion of the AF's method is bad. You can even view the alternative as militant preservation for planned success, as opposed to the 1AC's militant preservation for planned failure. First is their rejection of telos. This is an explicit, and you should not allow them to know link from it. They have said what they did in 1AC Crossing. They said they reject telos and just plan for each other. This is leftist melancholy. The failure to imagine a world otherwise locks us into the status quo and creates revolutionary pessimism. How can we plan beyond capitalism if we are always planning for failure? You should read the AV like Judas and the Black Messiah or the Chicago 7. While it might be radical in content, the form of focusing on the interpersonal and the focus on failure betrays its investment in capitalism. Hunt, which is their solvency advocate, is a defense of planned failure. Fuck off. We should plan success. Second is the Fanonian leap is bad. This is a DA to the mountain 20 card they read in the 1AC. It is a defense of revolts this summer in places like Minneapolis. While this may be affective of feeling, it does not create any of the structure to actually imagine a world otherwise. Even though these revolts may have reduced a little bit of violence, they were not planned, which allowed for the state to crack down in more insidious forms, which is a crackdown DA to planning without telos. Third is the Schulman evidence. I'll extend the argument from the case here. The affirmative has said said we should give up on policy and only do planning, which is their one I see most evidence. The alternative does both, which proves it is a pick out of their refusal, and the permutation is a negative argument. Policy in imagining world otherwise is necessary to actually respond to and reduce violence. And fourth, we are impact turning how they relate to debate. They have said we should not produce no knowns and have predictable stasis. Ask yourself how to plan a revolution without trying to understand the enemy and predict what they will do. They lock us in to the present and the status quo. Thirdly, I'm going to talk a lot about Cooperation Jackson because I don't think they understand it. It was founded by Chakwe Ansar Lumumba around a mass line and an explicit telos, which is the Jackson Kush plan of creating an independent black nation. It is distinct from the F and much closer to the alternative. More importantly, it fucking failed. The investment in only organizing the black working class of Jackson means they were unable to organize factory workers in the surrounding areas of Jackson, which locked in the forces of reaction. Also, we will residually impact turn Cooperation Jackson. Recently, Mayor Chakwe instituted gun control in Jackson because of pressure from the bourgeoisie legislator. This action made it much harder for revolution to occur because it de-armed the fucking working class. The reason he was able to do this is because he is not accountable to the mass line, and the leadership of Cooperation Jackson did not create mutual indebtedness, but rather a personality cult, which proves that their understanding of politics locks in failure. The permutation proper is that there's an education disadded communism requires the propagation of a materiality theory of class relation. Any link to their theory proves they make the organizing framework of the party ineffective. Thirdly, is the permutation is severance. They will inevitably retool have to make it seem as close to the alternative as possible. They need to defend the entire 1AC as presented. Lack of plantics means they get offense from any word or phrase in the 1AC. The negative should gain reciprocal offense. Anything else makes revolutionary clash impossible because the vague nature of affirmative solvency abdicates the lay of link potential. The next four arguments I explain the I need water. I explained the link debate above, so all of these arguments do not apply. The next argument about how extinction is the status quo for black people is wrong, but applies to the alternative. Because this is true, we should not lock in leftist melancholy and just plan and relate to each other, create new affect ways. Rather, we should seize the means of production and stop extinction from being the status quo, which proves the link to the critique. The next argument is about how we are entangled together. This is fucking Judith Butler liberalism. We should just be entangled together through dinner parties and feeling good together. It is the exact form of justance of inaction, which I explained above. The Cummings evidence I'll do. The alternative here, the commentary is the academic manifestation of a communist arising in a material relation that subordinates interest, the ultimate goal of a dictatorship of the proletariat requires the structure of the communist party to overcome and ultimately gain control of the space. Just as the Chicago School used academic economics to institute neoliberalism, we should use academia to theorize communist vision of the world. The alternative outweighs on scale of relative solvency. The only way to determine the desirability of various political orientations is to take them outside of academia onto the terrain of struggle. The terrain of struggle is class war. The alternative is able to create a political form that can gain and seize power, appropriate wealth, and stop capitalist oppression through mass organization. The affirmative, when generalized, is best able to make some people feel better and change some vocabulary. Even a high risk of offense, the alternative does not matter. The Cummings evidence. I will explain democratic centralism because it's the thesis of this card. The Comrade adopts the organizing strategy of democratic centralism, creating a central vanguard that is responsible to the concerns of the communist base. When racism occurs, disciplinary actions are possible to correct that violence going forward. All the actors point out violence, but can never organize power to solve it, which is an impact to their anti-power politics. We also do not say that identity politics is good. We think that class and race intersect, but they should not be the sole orient, which is the cooperation thing I did above. Respectability politics is not respectability because they lock in fascism. The gag evidence is wrong. Western bourgeoisie man did not just exist out of nowhere. The reason why enlightenment happened was the Western expropriation of wealth from Africa. The U.S. was came to terms because of latent capitalism. Also, nukes kill people, not metaphysical ideas, which is an impact term to how they've understood politics.
All right. We're gonna take some prep before cross checks. My thing won't mute. Give me one second. 7:32. All right. You good for cross-ex?
Yep. Can you hear me? I think so.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I'm a little confused how the alternative resolves a lot of your link arguments. You described the alternative as an academic manifestation.
Yes.
What about
So
sort of
we are
revolt?
communists, but we are in
Yeah, okay, go
academia right now. So we don't stop being communists when we're in academia.
Okay,
Rather, we should
so-
use what exists in our discussions in academia to orient ourselves towards communist revolution. A great example of this is the conversations between Lenin and Trotsky in London in around 1913 to 1914.
Okay,
Even
sure.
though they were
I understand
academia.
that you translate to communist politics. The question I have also, I don't know if this is just me, but there's like an echo.
Okay, I'm just gonna move it closer. I think that will solve the echo.
Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna continue. So you've made a lot of arguments that are just like, we can't have localized politics. We have to increase the scope and scale. You've then said, we can start conversations in spaces like this.
No,
that
because
scale
we're
up.
not. This
What
is our
the-
argument, right? We're not starting conversations. We are linking up the material struggle in here to a material struggle around the world. This is the affirmative.
In what way? In what way have you done that part?
Well,
In what way have you linked with anyone?
obviously, like we're on Zoom. We're in Zoom room 332 right now. Our argument is not like the literal alternative wasn't a literal linking up, but rather our argument is that communism in academia is better than mutual indebtedness. More importantly, you have made a 2AC argument that said this is a debate about what method is better. This was an explicit argument in the 2AC. Our argument is the method of communism.
I understand that, but you're making arguments that communism links up people. I'm asking you why that is true. You're just asserting communism can link up people.
So Moten understands violence through the differential cut.
Okay, not the link. What is alternative solvency?
This explains alternative solvency. We think that class is a violence that impacts all of us differently, and we should organize around that differential violence as the primary locus of responsibility.
Okay, so your essential alternative solvency argument is that we are class universal.
Class, we do not think we are only oriented around class, but rather class is the base of power, which is the Amaro explanation, which I explained above, that makes violence upon difference, such as what the 1AC has explained, more violent.
Okay, so to be clear, the threshold for alt solvency is 1, you have to link up different politics.
The threshold
2,
for alternative solvency, as given by the 2AC, is to create an alternative method that is more desirable than the app. You said that in the 2AC.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, but the way you get there. Okay, last question I have. How do you mobilize people to join communist revolution?
How do we mobilize people? Well, people have material. How do you
get people to join?
Well, people want to live in a better world, and it's pretty mean of you to say that people don't want to live in a better world. The history of material organizing from communism, which I explained in the 2AC about radical black activists in the American South, all prove it is works. Claire's going to talk about it a little bit in the 1 hour.
What? Yeah.
KT case.
I don't have any cards, so I'm not gonna send them off.
I'm going to move this mic, and then I'm going to have you read something from it.
Is everyone good whenever? If no one verbally objects, I'm going to assume I'm going to start whenever.
Sorry, I think I missed the order.
It's going to be KT case. The academy stuff at the top, like the offensive case. If no one verbally objects, I'm going to assume I'm going to start whenever. We have the best example of current radical organizing the African People's Socialist Movement, or a Floridian-based social group that engages in community preservation and revolutionary forms that have a strict hierarchy of white people, and the solidarity group is submissive to the vanguard. That makes it impossible for white people to control the group, which is a descent to horizontalism. Gatekeeping is good. Make sure the fascist state out hierarchy solves A. B. It means we can create rules to remove racist red, blue, and 20 you want me to read it?
You're good.
Okay. T. We're not going for T as a procedural reason to reject the team, nor a reason why the USFG-based policy education is good. We're foregrounding that in learning, iterative testing, and clashing over different rough tactics and strategies that made us necessary in combating impending crisis of racial capitalism. The 2EC's office proves our links to the critique, their interpretation, ignites our model is functioning in bad faith and moments where they forefront to not only resolve any of their offense and all indicate that by fear, create debate of practice and hegemonic policy, debate all USFG action and research practice without tactics that seeds action and every technology of action that's essential in every ref debates by defining all debates as plain text or rethinking, which leads us to the collusive occlusion of praxis, which is how we model non-normative politics, and we can never talk about criminal justice without starting and ending our politics within the state, which turns all their offense to. You can draw the vote neg presumption if they're right about debate as a site for subjectivity, then you don't need to vote have to solve every moment they cite, and we are site debating we learn from. We should engage them directly instead of invoking their names for a ballot, which turns activists into a commodity. So means for garnering ballot symbol of value 3, vote neg to vote aff. Easiest way out, we don't have to go for a T to win here. Their office about debating is per the 2AOC, which means if you think the F is a good idea, you can vote neg because it unsettles debate norms, which resolves their offense for gut check our interpol and state to change criminal justice. You can't take any step shape, including pessimism, anarchy, aggressive, communist, organization. It means we don't have to forward PRL paradigms, nor later repressive forms of debate, solve their scholarship only through forefronting methods which avoids the links to the academic area, Catholic set answers, logisticality, offense. We have to negate them, and we can still use any method, not through the use of G, which makes it possible to engage in logisticality. Their offense is answered by everyone above. They don't meet. They've given an advocacy and said they're in line with things, but they've never explained how their advocacy can materially reduce policing or sentencing. Was the reason they don't solve the debt relations, because obviously they don't solve people in debt within the criminal justice system. Maybe the app is necessary, but it's not sufficient. That move has always been a test and try within the academy, leaves an inevitable lack of outside academia response. Testing will never be perfect, so it's try or die to move out of it. The individualism stuff I answered. I'll answer on the academy came, but it also is answered above. Logistics was above. We're conceding their interp is better. The case. Academy K, frame your ballot around the K. The representation of transparency, no coherent knowledge production with eminence to debate cases reproduces neoliberal logic as innovation and turned alterity into a spectacle instead of knowledge. The AF wants they predominantly focus on recognition with enable species of call and response for closest any possibility of translation to radical policy and political projects. We're not turning the AF and saying be quiet, suck it up. We're turning the location and presentation of the AF. Even if they win the AF isn't itself a good idea. It's not enough. They have to win that not only debate but academia is the proper setting for discussions of ulteriority. The debate is not about competing methods, about research practices within logic of transparency. If we were to introduce the link of the say you vote neg for the party, it's the best decolonial subject formation because it creates species setting up to the university like Roderick Ferguson's Black Bibliophiles at Harvard, where students learn the language of interrogation in the informal academic space by reading and thinking and learning together. That was a knowledge practice that was never lost. The goal of revolution argument is not that study is based on faith, but rather that we need to orient our studies around revolution to learn from one another, so it actually stands a chance of racial in the face of racial capitalism. 3 implications. 1, it takes out solvency for the AF. Any risk we don't have offense in this debate should supercharge our claims about a presumption of the AF and not doing anything in the first place. Magnifying transparency is a safer interracial and come on occasion of violence instead of racial radical rethinking. 2, complicit validation presenting in transparency logic is dangerous, especially when you give it to the judge the way of evaluating the AF solvency through the boundless validation seeks to allow minimal engagement with the theorizing relationality proves their epistemology is flawed because the way you integrate knowledge into debate community creates a cultural association with vote AF because of our theories. It doesn't link to the alternative. They said vote AF to default on our debt, vote neg to not default on our debt, but they do the alt practice that bans our indebtedness but challenges capitalism, settler colonialism, and they want the ballot. They say they vote AF to recognize that we are innocent. The AF can't spill up to anything. Having debates over one's concept of one's time does not suddenly create radical thought that allows us to have the top and solve the harms that they can't solve. U.S. violence or exploitation because which basically moves the entire overview. They do not have a method. I said that on the page, make the clear internal link as to what the AF is necessary to. All the movements they listed already exist. Why is the politics of the 1AC in the ballot when suddenly why does that performativity mean that suddenly happen in their performativities happen in the debate space for 50 years? Maybe their politics makes us feel good, but it hasn't stopped white backlash and reaction to K-bait, and it certainly won't in round 5 of the TOC if it didn't in the finals of the DT. I'm going to go back to the Beller stuff because I want to make sure I explicitly answer the concession of the thesis of the academy. It makes a game over academia. The plan will be an artifact in academia they think is bad. It drains the ability to solve and catalogs us into the U.S. archive to manage and discipline. It happens after World War II. It turns their Beller argument. They don't access a glitch or find logisticality, but rather let the U.S. find those glitches and resolve them first rather than letting lets academia recover and conform to their politics. That moves their access to the Beller argument, which I did above. Do you want me to read a card or anything?
Yeah. If I have time. Yeah. I'll just read this.
This one?
Yeah. Just read this a little bar.
The Argentinian insurrection from the 1AC hunt evidence they used community celebrations of resilience that took streets with the noise to reject colonial governance and take the control of the factories, but those movements fizzled out and were crushed because they were so busy reacting to colonial governance that they rejected all possibility for a scalable politics.
Good. Yeah, we're good.
All right. 7:32. 5:45.
The order is case for T, then the K.
Gabe's gonna go fill up his water bottle. We should wait.
Is anyone not ready? Vote Act for military preservation, similar to Holder Highland people. The act traces Dakota logistics and turns immigrants to an indebted, incomplete field that halts violent intuition that stops social engineer for black and brown students to enter ongoing logistics and orients it towards the decriminalization of the neoliberal debt relation. Presumption will be answered on T. In the Academy K, one, the after prerequisite, it revitalizes social engineer, reprise the ability to form those, but their imposition of the need to work towards a telos is a perverse normative policy that individuates our ability to feel through others. And two, military preservation bridges the in here and out there, which makes it inherently political. Their vision is solely links to the individuation. Decide in three, no links to Ferguson, presumes a divide between in here and out there to separate scholars and the activists. Is the link turned by arguments of being in but not of the university. I refusing is called to order by creating future moments within it. The refusal of the university altogether only leads to art white filling that differs by the way black brown scholars do not weaponize the university. And for the idea that we don't do anything is ridiculous. The explanation of their 2NC as academic scholarship and informed movements outside of it links us to those others movements. Next, T. One, yes, the after the departure from the status quo, both research and military preservation are material. A plethora of examples from Poe Valley Logistics, right? Buyers Club, and Operation Jackson prove that this strategy disrupts the production line. But this debate should not be a question of how we spill into, not out of debate. Two, it creates a double standard threshold for absolvency if our method is good. And three, vote negative, vote aft. That is the academy's commodification of labor that says that they should get to steal it. Next, the critique. The impacts only matter if they can solve them. 2AC 1 and 2 case outweighs logistics overcodes capitalism is no longer about the proletariat being alienated from the means of production, but from the means of social reproduction based on sociopathic for access at an interpersonal level that only we solve. Capitalist situation to expropriation, exploitation that is focused on the demand for black life that feels it not just in context being alienated from the means of production, but a sociopathic for access that seeks to take away your dreams, desires, and very ways of living, which their framing cannot solve through purity politics. Psychoanalysis arguments are wrong. Beller says that we can change those only through the AF. No one enjoys failure, but only viewing the status quo as a failure leads to a radical break from when we might not know exactly what we generate, but refuses neoliberalism in every space. We have impact turn viewing failures an end of our politics. Failure is not an event, but a process that's able to learn from and create momentum for the future. And the Amaro evidence, root cause capitalism predating slavery is irrelevant because our racial capitalist frame engages both, but the episteme of the humanism vouchsafed by universal linguistic classification is the cultural justification for every critique impact like research and equities, wars, and environmental collapse, industrializing the human justify disposable commoditization, which was our Gagny evidence, and they said accountability mechanisms. The act creates energy for the people, for people to commune and organize in the first place, to create accountability and parties to resolve and endure racial and sexual violence through negotiation, not just kick people out, which is the locus of anti-blackness. And it's an intimate violence can be solved, but even if the root cause is true, seizing means of production cannot solve because it's at an interpersonal level, which demonstrates the net benefit to the permutation. I'll do it here. 2AC 3 was permutation to both extend to Kozoi evidence. We were always already the alternative. Hapticality is key to mobilize resistance. In an era marked by police brutality and tear gas, black folks, black trans folks, and black disabled folks need a way to survive outside the paradigm of vertical organizing where they risk being killed. Dual power needs touch and feeling. Their hapticality to feel each other's needs, to know where the cops are and sabotage the logistics. The alternative skips that step and oversimplifies the history of organizing. Jackson cuts to people assembly named MXGM not only invented dual power, but it's also based in the form of African spiritual healing that through touch and feeling that they cannot access. And the telos link hapticality is the practical the practice of radical openness against the logistics attempt to containerize and ship a mode of being together that cultivates communities of care for the sake of care, as opposed to biopolitical modes of calculability that entrenches necropolitical hierarchies, which replicates every impact. We only work until we reach the success of instead of building new worlds. And two, with the Phenon link, the Moten 20 link, it turned vertical organizing, absent racial ethics, or bad makes extreme movements colorblind to racial issues, which always puts black and brown bodies on the back burner for the interests of the party. Three, the Schulman evidence, our Kozoi evidence turns this militant preservation is in line with democratically centered politics, approach the plethora of material example of fugitivity and forming those institutional structures. And the last link, every indict they have made to Cooperation Jackson is ridiculous. The one I say Kozoi evidence doesn't say black conservatism is good. It's just like saying that the Dean evidence, that Dean says the anti-capitalist struggle is good, so they should be held to every pass for your communism, like Cuba, the USSR, etc. You should understand Cooperation Jackson, illustration of the aspect of mutual indebtedness premise on the reclamation of black and native sovereignty. And they said no perms, but yes perms in a method debate. Anything else justifies AF which is worse than a factor solidarity by tearing people apart at the margins. And they said then the alternative fails. The 2NC just read the alt blog but did not answer our indict. Jody Dean comradeship is performed as Stalinism that proliferates anti-black pathologization by relating anything that contradicts her as mere identity politics. Her obsession with the University of House conscious misdiagnosis of radical capitalism functions by refusing working class relationship and survival strategy for solely top-down implementation and said you prefer socialism from below that translates those solidarities into a broader network against relation against capitalism. And there's the one in artist brief mutual exclusivity. The Red Blue and the Florida Group are both Moscow organizations that are not international linkages that they've demonstrated which appears that they link just as much. I don't know if there's somewhere else I have to go. Capitalism attrition to expropriation and exploitation focused on demand for black lives. It feels that not just being a country, but any from the means of production and sociopathic for access seeks to take away dream of futurity. This other extinction scenarios such tactical whiteness. I imagine the future which distract from the death of black bodies now. Is there anything else? The alternative has no way to mobilize the masses absent analog mutual indebtedness, and they don't have an explanation for how their alternative is able to mobilize against environmental collapse in a fashion that they was the impact that they described.
Yeah, I don't know where we're at.
We're not actually at 9, are we? I didn't.
4-2. Wait, I just want to make sure. Coppell, we have us at 4-2, but I didn't send it to chat. Are you okay with that?
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. 4-2.
Starting now.
I trust you. It's all good.
We're done with prep, but we're gonna wait for the judge.
Cool. Everyone can hear me? I'd like a thumbs up just because of the mistake last time. Perfect. The order is case in the or cap and then case. Actually, the order is case or cap T and then case. Okay. Are people good? Okay. 5 minutes.
Sorry, you cut out for me. Will you just repeat the order?
Yeah, cap T case. I'm gonna expect everyone is good. The average of political impotence that the fascist class loves, the call for new ways of organizing ourselves without a democratic centralist mechanism to hold and gain power makes politicization inevitable at the worst possible moment. They've conceded that there's a collapse of capitalist hegemony in the status quo, so cause militarized war and climate change with disproportionate impacts on the global south. This will result in human extinction, which makes it impossible to culminate in the communities that the affirmative thinks is impossible, so they cannot solve any of the case. The response to this should not be finding new ways to relate to each other or feel with each other. They've conceded that the fascist class is creating a cadre, and right now they're working to seize and gain material power. Any DA to the alternative, any DA to the world is magnified 100 times in the world of the affirmative because they are unable to gain power. Locks us in to Nazis rise the exact same as 1920s Germany, which makes it try or die for the alternative. The first three arguments, the immoral evidence was dropped in the 2AC and the 1AR. There's not an on-point response other than root causes and reverse causal, but this does not get to the complexity of our argument. Our argument is the means of social reproduction are the means of material reproduction. The reason why reproductive and affective labors primarily happen to black women and black non-men is because capitalism forces them into those things for social reproduction. To focus on affect solely in here locks us into political impotence because we can never challenge the structures that force us to do reproductive labor, challenge the structures that force us to exist in a violent world, which proves that capitalism brings the after presumption. The next three arguments about psychoanalysis, this is our link to the critique of failure. The gene evidence is explicit. The 1AC has called for planned failure, and we have impact turned planned failure. Leftist academics love to say that we are existing in planned failure. We're creating new ways of relating to each other. It creates a jaunt of action and makes us feel revolutionary without ever doing anything. They have conceded all of our examples about how movies and affect, about how we feel like we can't do anything, so we try to relate to each other instead of creating macro structures, which is a dissent to the affirmative politics. Root cause does not matter. The Gagny evidence they've conceded our counter history of humanism. The reason why the Enlightenment happened was because the material accumulation of wealth from the global south. This was a fundamentally capitalist project, and so we should understand each other as full humans and full comrades so that we can respond to this capitalism, so they cannot solve this Gagny argument. And we have linked it. The affirmative does not create energy. The affirmative creates jaunt. We feel radical. We feel energized, but we never do anything. The framing for this is they've conceded our critique of the Argentinian Revolution and our critiques of Cooperation Jackson. I think the 2AC said Cooperation Jackson 15 times in the 2AC impact turned it for a minute. You don't get to just know Link because we know more about your scholarship than you do. It is a great example of the apps politics. Cooperation Jackson was radical in content, but did not engage in democratic centralism nor have accountability mechanisms. It did not try to organize the entire working class, but just the ones in debt relation. The culmination of this is a 30-year political project that has resulted in gun control that demobilized the masses, bourgeoisie, political capture, and was unable to organize shit. So the energy they organize is bad. The Kozai evidence, which is their explanation of the permutation in the 1AR, is an explicit defense of Cooperation Jackson. They should be held to this. They talked about it a shit ton of times in the 1AR. They said we're Cooperation Jackson. Half-tocality is good. They've conceded another argument that the alternative can be read as a pick. It is an argument about why we should not plan for failure, but rather plan for success. Absent planning for success, we are locked into what Mark Fisher calls capitalist realism because we can never imagine a world otherwise, which is a dissent to the permutation. We agree that the 1AC was always already a permutation. We explicitly said we were picked out of their planned failure in the 1AR. There was not a response to this. The alternative is not oversimplified. The affirmative is not dual power. It is academic labor towards no end, which fails and locks in leftist impotence. Radical openness is bad. This was also drive the laws for fascists to infiltrate the party, makes anti-black violence much worse. They should not take the risk of their things. Care for the sake of care doesn't do anything. When we are locked into a world in which we are forced to work, in which we are forced to do reproductive labor, just caring for the sake of caring is bourgeoisie perversion of Marxism. Colorblindness is not bad, nor is it the alternative. The alternative is a material relationship of comradeship. The moral evidence, which I explained above, is our counter theory of race. So we do agree that race matters. We just think that is mediated through the relationship of capitalism. The alternative has no way to solve any of this stuff. They've conceded a theory of democratic centralism, which is the last argument I have to go for. The affirmative has no accountability mechanism. Just feeling for each other does not do anything. Democratic centralism forces the leadership to be accountable to the mass line, which makes violence much less likely. They say that there's socialism from below. How does socialism from below gain power? Never answered in the 1 AR, no 2 AR arguments on this, because the reason we got going for the critique, we link to the critique. No, we organize our scholarship around the material coordination of comradeship, which is very distinct from the affirmative that organizes around failure. We both agree methods are good, so we have introduced a counter method. Extinction is not white fear, it affects black and brown people disproportionately. Explained on the case, we can have mobilized the mass history changing the material relationship of power, which I explained above. The Tom Kelly, I'm not going for it. It wasn't offense. I will concede there. Cooperation Jackson. They dropped Cooperation Jackson was bad. This is game over case. This case is that presumption. Forces interpersonal violence. They can't solve it. K-debate does not stop violence. That the academic position has happened for 50 years within debate. None of this stop violence. And secondly, is that relation. There's no material spill up and they have a motto in our line with movement, but no articulation of why those things change that relationship. The moment of weakness and logisticality cannot be solved by academia because they've conceded their citational practice gets constantly reiterated for profit and does not create a conceptual glitch, which is what their evidence is about. So they are not a glitch, but rather a reformulation of profit.
Okay. We have 5:45. It's case and then the K. Okay. Is anyone not right? In trying to win a league argument, Minneapolis South has made the critique way too difficult for the alternative to ever be able to solve their link arguments. They have zero explanation for how the alternative solves any of their impacts. So if we win the risk of solvency, it is sufficient to vote F on the permutation. Now, they've dropped all of our case examples to demonstrate this. Similar to the Coppell organization, the Po Valley Logistics Sites that stood for each other and empowered corporate interests in their collectivity, not for political good, but for each other. Buyers clubs who put a collective buying power to create care for each other and distribute it while sabotaging the profits of pharmaceutical patent owners, but was made possible only through the initial care and collectivity of mutual indebtedness. All of this demonstrates that only the affirmatives method is able to solve in conjunction in order to challenge neoliberalism. Otherwise, they lock in an unattainable model that can never translate to broader politics. This means that the affirmative is a necessary prerequisite. These examples are explicitly extended in the 1AR, and they were simply dropped on the T page, and they were simply dropped in the 2NR, which demonstrates this. Now, the first arguments on the case, I'll answer them here. The first argument that the app does not solve interpersonal violence. Our argument was never that the forwarding of in debate is the only thing that they've dropped, that you should vote AF if the AF's method is a good idea, and it demonstrates a departure from the status quo. All the examples I explained above prove that and as well as the argument that we decriminalize the neoliberal debt relation, prove that if we win, the AF's method is good, is sufficient to solve, and it does solve interpersonal violence in the process of negotiation, which we explained further on the permutation on the cap K2. They've dropped, there's no link to their university academia turn because we are in but not of the university, refusing its call to order, i.e. its constant demand for policy, but creating future moments within it. There's no judge kick argument in the 2NR, which means that this is not a DA that you can vote on alone, and the alternative obviously links insofar as they forwarded a revolutionary strategy in debate. 3, they've dropped that it reproduces a neoliberal divide between the scholars and activists in here, which applies to the don't solve for interpersonal violence argument as well, without understanding their co-constitutive nature, which turns alt solvency. Scholarship matters for the same reason 2NC cross-ex. They said it does because it can create material organizing that's birthed from it, and anything else that reproduces neoliberal divide that does not allow for coalitional politics, which turns alt solvency, which is a DA that you can vote on as well. The critique. The alternative does not solve anything. They've dropped our indict to their Dean evidence from our Cummings evidence. Jody Dean's camaraderie is a form of performative Stalinism that belittles everything as mere identity politics or obsession with the universality of class consciousness, which is the basis for all of their link arguments, i.e. we are not class conscious enough, we are not revolutionary enough, we are not get to a big enough scope, misdiagnosis how racial capitalism functions by refusing working class relationships and survival strategies that may not overthrow the means of production but provide food, housing, etc. Instead, you should prefer socialism from below, which is the permutation that translates those local politics into broader network movements against capitalism, which is the only way to cultivate violence that is capable of changing the system. You can vote them down for not being able to access a broader scale of politics that the AF can. Mutual preservation creates a practice of understanding and indebtedness with each other, where we understand the only reason we have to act is because we understand our relationships are intertwined with the others around us. When we understand we cannot survive without the others around us, it creates an indebted engagement with each other, which is critical to AF solvency. This means the 2NR explanation of the alternative is basically we mobilize the masses with zero explanation for how we get there, which only the affirmatives method is capable of mobilizing people to join them. They say Democratic Central. The first argument in the 2NR is demonstrative of why they should lose this debate. The failure of the 2NR is the failure to answer Arcozoy evidence, which explicitly cites Democratic Central planning in the context of RAF and says it is possible to incorporate it. You should consider now the next argument is impact. So impacts only matter if they can solve them from every link to how they can overcome them, because they've set the link for a threshold far too high for any alternative to be able to solve it. That Morrow evidence permutation obviously solves this. The link explained in the 2NR was, quote, focus on solely in here is bad, end quote, which obviously translating that outward solves the system of logistics, however, creates an system of individualized ethics that always splinters working class resistance. Self-interest comes before the people around you, forces the proletariat back into self-serving categories and never able to come together. Only the AF solves this because it creates an unconditional love and care that creates commonality, which is explained above. There's now the next argument is the Dean evidence. So no one enjoys failure, but only viewing the status quo politics as a failure can incite a radical break where we may not know exactly what we generate, but it freezes the neoliberalism as we come across it, which is critical to generate new worlds, which will explain it a little below. The Gagny evidence not going for it, and it's functionally irrelevant now. The permutation duo 2AC3, the 1AC was always already the alternative. Dual power needs fugitive, underground micropolitical forms of relationality through military preservation to work. We need to feel each other's needs and work for each other to foment broader coalitional organizing. The alternative skips that step, oversimplifies the history of organizing intrinsic to the Black radical tradition. Jackson Kush, the People's Assembly, NIM, and XGM, just to name a few, that not only invented their organizing, but based in a form of African spiritual practice that only we can access. Only the apps inclusion solves, creates an accountability. I think they put care on the back burner for the greater good. They create our logistics impacts about social policing because they recreate a society where the condition of possibility is always determined by who is and is not producing enough, which necessarily excludes Blackness, proven by our Kozoi explanation. Now, the next argument is telos link. 1, viewing failure as an end is bad. It's a process to be learned from to create new futures. And 2, only work for production of new relationalities, which was impact turned above. Now, the openness argument not solved by alternative. We're always infiltrated, which demonstrates that doesn't solve all is colorblindness. It's our link was about productivity. The demand for more and more from individuals is bad.
Good debate.
Good debate, all.
Do you want an evdoc? No.
No, I'm good.
Wait, sorry, I missed it. Did you say you did or didn't want an FDoc?
No, I'm all right.
All right.
All right, I'm good. Everybody here? Make sure everybody here. All right, for sure. This is a really good debate. I enjoyed it from both sides. I think both teams were making some really good arguments. It definitely had me sitting here for a minute. I ended up voting affirmative, pretty much on perm do both. I think the app does a pretty good job of talking about one specifically how the app individually is sufficient to be able to solve through kind of the military preservation of obviously embracing kind of the faults of the status quo or whatever to be able to resolve the impacts. I think my issue with this, I guess in general, that makes it very hard for me to like vote for the negative on the alone is one, this kind of argument of the app being like, I don't know how in the hell the alt is going to be able to solve for like nuclear war, ecological destruction. So I think that is like a zero-sum question. And I also think that a lot of the things that y'all pinned them on in the 2NR is very heavy in terms of the question of not having kind of a praxis or any enforcement mechanism of like compliance, or doesn't lead to like the fragmentation that y'all kind of talk about. I definitely think the alt result or the permutation kind of resolves this one because y'all have articulated examples of how there are kind of communist struggles in the skull that can be able to be attached to materially outside that can be enforced into the political that allows us to be able to resolve for some of those impacts. Even outside of that, I think the alt is missing the boat, and at least the AF is doing a good job of winning the argument that the links are not very contextual, or at least are not good enough to make me or persuade me in the world that like they would lead to a continuous accumulation of capital, or that the mutual indebtedness that like kind of like Moten talks about would not be able to resolve the logistics that like stops corporate organizations or whatever to stop the accumulation of capital. I also think that the I guess the way that like or y'all focus or kind of strategy in a 2NR, I think y'all should have just like, I mean, in the beginning, I'm even more persuaded in terms of this kind of like presumption argument for the app. Like, I think that was like going for y'all, and y'all instead just kind of go for just like the kind of links is just add to the app and then like the alt stuff, which I don't think is really necessarily the most persuasive for me because I think that the app is good at resolving all the arguments about capitalism. I also think that in the world of like the alternative alone, y'all would not be able to kind of resolve. Well, I guess yeah. Let me see. Yeah, I also don't see in the world of like the alternative, or at least from y'all, in terms of why exactly it would lead to forms of compliance and accountability mechanisms, just because there are present kind of communist systems in place. I also think some of the academia arguments y'all go for is kind of zero sum. Like I think kind of both of y'all link to that. I don't think that anybody necessarily like loses in that world, because I think that because it's a method debate in the academic space, that I don't think that y'all do a good argument of delineating between what is the world of the av does that's separate from the world of the alternative. So I think that there's only a risk that I kind of vote for the permutation. Yeah, because I think that they're probably a better understanding, or at least a better kind of theorization of like how we should resolve capitalism. But beyond that, the kind of like racialized way in which that kind of functions as well. And I think that even how y'all kind of frame it is just like kind of a caveat thing where y'all just like, yeah, we do have the starting point of a class base, but we take into account kind of the racialization means that it's more of an afterthought and not a kind of a functional, like central premise of the world of kind of centralized democratization. If I was to only invest into the alt alone. I think for the affirmative, I think the 1AR is really good in terms of like clearing this up for me too on kind of like the case debate in terms of exactly like how like the negative would kind of lead into some of the arguments about like logistics that y'all talk about, how that would be like reaffirmed or like how it wouldn't account for those things. I think y'all should do a better job also in the future of making an argument in terms of like not being pinned down to just being like we are like, or at least the negative, they kind of make this argument of saying like y'all are just a form of pessimism that cannot like kind of supersede like the status quo and stuff. And I think y'all should instead use kind of more of the phraseology of just like the pessimism of the av leads to a new form of optimism. And y'all kind of get to that later in terms of like the perm articulation, but I think that y'all should not let them pigeonhole y'all to just being like y'all af is just a form of pessimism because y'all embrace failure of the world of like obviously the way in which like capitalist structures not only function but also how like counter kind of hegemonic systems like work and like you know saying how that kind of works and stuff. I think that also for the negative, like I think the 2NC was like super fire. I think that also the thing that y'all should have that is in the 2NC that is not really as much, I think, in the 2NR is just kind of just like the fungibility type stuff. Like I think that kind of gets lost as well. And I think that articulation that you have and just like the true reason why like Black and Indigenous populations is not because of drive of education, but continuous drives of violence. Like I think that that's like really good to kind of pin up why y'all kind of take that characterization into account by just having a centralized democratization, but that just kind of gets lost for me in the 2NR or is not like really as heavy in my opinion. I also think that, I mean, y'all should also be making a severance argument in the 2NR about like this permutation, they don't respond to this in the 1AR in terms of like the theory response to why they don't get the perm. And I think that that's like one of the only reasons why I even kind of start to look and evaluate it in terms of them even being able to win, that there is kind of a distinction or delineation between, or like the way in which the AF can make the argument like we are a pick as well, or we already assume the world of the AF. I think that that just kind of gets lost in the 200. I think that that should have definitely been there for sure.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Explain the alternative better. The 2NR said the words, the AF was always already the permutation, and the 2NR was always the net. We were always already a pick. And just these are the two questions that I'm struggling with. We also impact turned cooperation Jackson, which is what they said they were, for 3 minutes of the block and a minute of the 2NR, and the 2AR didn't respond to either of these arguments. Like there's not a place on my floor where they said cooperation Jackson good, nor is there a place on my floor where they said the pick doesn't compete. So I get the permutation would make sense, but like severance is a pick argument. We said severance, they didn't answer in the 1AR, and I extended the alternative is a pick. And then the 2AR didn't answer that. So I'm not sure why like the permutation resolves when we're doing less than the affirmative.
Yes, I understand that the theory argument of what a pick is. Again, I don't think that that is responsive to their argument about, I don't think that that's a responsive argument about severance. I'm kind of confused on that one.
Well,
like just because you say it's a pick, I don't see how that's responsive to.
So the link argument associated with the pick, in my understanding, and this might have not been communicated effectively, was that then they have said that failure is good, right? They said they are planned failure. We made a link argument about psychoanalysis, about how planned failure is bad. The alternative is planned success, which is a word I said, and then there wasn't a response to that.
All right. So first, though, I guess I'll again, I'm kind of confused on why you saying that it's a pick is responsive to the theory argument that it's severance. That's the part I'm kind of confused on still. But okay.
I don't understand the severance argument. I get severance. Like if we win their severance, there's no permutation. But if we win then like we've said something the AF has done is bad, and we do less than that thing, that is also an argument about why you have to like.
I guess let me clarify. I don't think that the alt is planned inclusive. That's the point. Like, I think that they are making a delineation between the question of like how they frame like logistics and how mutual indebtedness and how they resolve that through all their like molten stuff is distinct from the world of the alt of democratic centralization. I do not think that the pick argument that you make is sufficient to respond to that argument. So I guess I'll clarify.
That makes sense. The 2NR didn't do it. Secondly, cooperation Jackson. There wasn't 2AR arguments about it.
Okay, first off, I'm gonna clarify with this. You make an argument about this cooperation Jackson stuff, whatever. I don't personally know what the hell that is. So the kind of articulation in terms of you making that argument, I don't know what that theorization is. So I guess that should clear something up for you right there. Number two, that is not the central focus of the 2NR. Your argument is about pretty much about the links about the individualization of like what the AF does that would lead to kind of the fragmentation of what the alt would be able to resolve. I think the permutation of them getting perm do both and y'all not sticking them on that means that they get access to the perm. Y'all also are not making a theory argument by saying the perm. Also, they make a responsible argument as just being like, no, y'all have it the other way around. The AF is already presuming the world of the alternative. So even in a world where I don't vote for the perm, I still think the AF is sufficient to resolve the offense of the alt that y'all don't get to. Granted, I also think that the terminal impacts that you isolate with the critique, which I mentioned as well, does not get resolved by the alternative. But I think the AF does have a risk of resolving that.
Okay, that makes sense. But so I spent like a minute of the 2NC saying cooperation. They said 2AC and the 1AC. They said we are cooperation Jackson is an example of the affirmative. The 2NC was like cooperation Jackson is bad. It does gun control. It does liberal capture, right? And then the 1AR did not answer this argument. It said, and then they said they were cooperation Jackson 3 more times. And then the 2NR was like, we've impacted on the AF method. So I don't understand why why does the permutation resolve that one?
Okay, for one, I think that the affirmative is also making an argument about like how mutual indebtedness itself will be able to break from the kind of liberal individuation and the stuff that y'all talk about. Literally is a collective question of how all of the types of logistics and stuff uniquely affect bodies, specifically Black and brown bodies, right? And how it's able to transcend that through kind of the transmogrification of how social interactions work, or at least how it uniquely affects bodies through systems of capitalism. I don't see how one that would not be able to resolve this kind of cooperation Jackson, because they don't say cooperation Jackson in the 2AR that's not responsible.
Yes, but they said it in every other speech.
Again, yes, even if they do not say the term cooperation Jackson, I think that terms, or at least whatever they said in a 2AR, I can go to some lines if you want me to, that I think is still responsive. That's what I'm confused on. Again, and that's the one I'm trying to clarify to you as well. This kind of cooperation Jackson argument that is blown up into 2NC, right? I don't understand exactly what the delineate, or at least like how that problematizes the world of the affirmative. That's what I'm also not understanding.
Okay, that makes sense. I need to impact out why cooperation Jackson is the world of the affirmative. So
yes, because I don't understand how
it
links to the app, or how they wouldn't be able to resolve it.
But the
like I think
AR
it's a question of a watch, because I
T.
think that. Okay, go ahead.
1AR on T, it said, we meet your interpretation. The affirmative is cooperation Jackson, which gets people out of prison. That was the explicit words they said. Like, I don't know how I have to link them to something that they said they are. Like they said they're cooperation Jackson.
Okay, again, I'm confused on what is the impact to this cooperation Jackson argument. That means that the app cannot win this debate, or is not resolved through the permutation. That's what I'm confused on.
Okay, so we won the link. We didn't win the impact to the link, so the permutation resolved it. That makes a little more sense. Tighten up alt explanation, explain how it spills out of this space, and then make the perm severance argument more explicitly in the 2.
I was about to say, I don't, again, like on my account, in terms of the academy stuff, again, I think that is a wash, because I think that y'all's kind of praxis in terms of like the alt itself, for both teams in terms of this methods debate, links to any arguments, period, about academia or being able to transcend. Like, just because you give examples, for example, like the Lenin example you talk about, they actually talk about like kind of responses to how to challenge like capitalism or whatever and stuff like that, right? I don't see how that's not like it's not resolved, or it's something that is like problematic for the app, but not problematic for the critique. That itself, I'm confused on. That's what I'm not getting.
That makes sense. It was a case argument that I didn't explain why I delineated from the alternative. Yeah, so there's an AF on presumption valid there. That makes sense. I don't think I have any more questions. Good debate, Coppell. Thanks for judging. Good luck later on.
No problem. Do y'all got any questions for the affirmative?
Yeah, I just had one really. Obviously like I like dropped some stuff that I shouldn't have. Do you think if we just said the alternative is not just a pick because argument is like capitalist, they've explained an alternative outside of just like we do the AF minus this. They've explained the alternative as like here's a different method for organizing. Argument is that can be incorporated with the AFs, could get us out. And then we like, so I guess it's not really perm to both, but it's like perm AF plus non-mutually exclusive parts small would, and explaining it in that frame would maybe help.
So I think it'd be a lot better, yeah. But I think I mean, I don't really have much of an issue with it. And the reason why, like I said, is I think in the world of when we do the world of the AF of embracing failure, but also doing the world of the alt, I don't see why we would not be able to dually embrace the failures of the status quo, i.e. be able to understand the way in which that not only how these structures function, how we have challenged them historically, right? And how we can kind of reassess and be able to further implement better practice to be able to challenge logistics and stuff, coupled with the world of the alternative, where there is like a form of centralized democratization, to have kind of like, as they say, a vanguard, or to have a kind of some type of enforcement mechanism into the political sphere, as well as to resolve or to have the kind of individuation that the mutual indebtedness and stuff that the app will be able to do wouldn't be able to resolve that. So I think that perm due to plan and non-mutually exclusive parts of the alt, would be potentially better in terms of articulation. Granted, again, I don't think that, you know what I'm saying, perm do both would not still be a bad idea to go for, or to make the argument about like being able to resolve the offense of the app and the critique.
Okay, that makes sense. That's all I had. Thank you for judging.
Thank you.
All right, good debate.